Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Sāmaṇera Nipako, and today our topic will be Dhamma practice in daily life. This is a question we get quite frequently, both from people that are brand new and rather seasoned. So I figured it's always a good time to go over this particular topic. So before I begin, I am mostly planning on talking about ways in which things worked for me as somebody that was quite a ways away from monasteries. The two that I would most frequent were both 3.5 or more hours away from me. So I had to get a little bit creative and decide on priorities at times. If you look in the description on YouTube, Facebook has a limited allowance for links, so I list various suttas that will be beneficial for lay people, as well as past talks from Empty Cloud that address the particular suttas if applicable. So there is a huge number of suttas you can go read if you check out the description, and I'll talk about them a little bit more later. So I'll begin by paying homage to the Buddha, the reason why we are all gathered here today, and then we can get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Sanghaṃ namasami. Right, hello to Manal and Jayanta who are joining us online, and anybody else who might be lurking but not checking in, or who may decide to watch this later. So as I had mentioned at the beginning, today our topic will be Dhamma practice in daily life. Usually, the way that this question is phrased is, how can I bring the Dhamma into my daily life? But the longer I've been practicing, I've realized that's not the right question. Instead, it should be, how can I bring daily life into the Dhamma? And this might sound the same because the position is just reversed, but it ends up setting the priority. So in the first question, daily life is a priority and Dhamma is secondary. In the other question, Dhamma is priority and daily life is secondary. So right at the beginning, something that anybody who wants to practice more or thoroughly is going to have to consider is, what is your priority? Is it daily life or is it the Dhamma? And your actions, what you end up putting emphasis on, what you actually end up doing, will give you the answer to that regardless of what your immediate answer is. I know a lot of people that say, oh yes, the Dhamma is my priority, and what they're doing definitely indicates otherwise, which is fine. Everyone is free to choose what their priorities are. So it's something you'll just need to be honest with yourself about. Either way, regardless of if daily life or Dhamma is your priority, the various suggestions and things that I found worked for me, you could use however you see fit. Everyone's situation is going to be a little bit different. So I also encourage creativity. Don't bind yourself in a way that limits you, and take advantage of opportunities when they happen. So the first thing that made a big difference for me when I was still a layperson was going to a monastery. Now this might sound obvious, but sometimes it is really difficult to even do this. When I first started practicing, I was in high school and I grew up Roman Catholic. So there was no way that my family was going to let me, regardless of how they may or may not have felt about Buddhism, this teenager go to some place they've never been to before that was 12 hours away because I would have to take the train and the bus at the time. I didn't have a car. So for the first 6 years of my practice, when I was a teenager and the first year and a half or two of college, I was practicing by myself. And that was really, really difficult. Once I finally was able to go to a monastery, which was the Leverett, Massachusetts Peace Pagoda, also known as the New England Peace Pagoda, that lit a little spark in me that, hey, I actually can get to these places. For me in particular, and this is something you should take advantage of if you're in college, because I've learned that there's a lot of people from Stony Brook and Rutgers, which are nearby in particular, that like to go to monasteries. And a lot of them watch this channel because we're not too far away. If you have a non-sectarian religious group, if you have a Buddhist group, if you have a meditation group, see if they'd be willing to go to a monastery. This is exactly what happened for me. I was the only Buddhist in the entire college, and I was one of 5 people that were meditating. So for me at the time, I joined this non-sectarian religious group who were so kind. Once they found out that I had never been to a monastery, they decided that our field trip that semester would be going to the nearest monastery, which was the Peace Pagoda. I went to college in Springfield, Massachusetts. And then from there, they then sponsored me to go to Zen Mountain Monastery, which was who I had been primarily practicing with from a long distance. So if you get involved with people that are also practicing, even if it's not necessarily Buddhism, this can be a good way to actually get to a monastery. I don't know, and I wanted to say I feel like I probably wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the kindness of these people getting me to a monastery. So be creative, make connections. This is a really, really big step. Even if you can only come for 3 days a year, so one weekend, there's 365 days of the year, 3 days, for most people, the majority of people will not cripple them. So find a way to make it work. It also doesn't necessarily have to be the tradition that you are practicing with. Just go to a monastery where you can practice and you think it is suitable enough. Really do not underestimate just how big of a difference this makes. It's really worth it. And if the Dhamma is really your priority, going back to that question in the beginning, if there is a will, there is a way. You will make it work out. If I could make a 12-hour journey by train and bus to Zen Mountain Monastery, you can make a journey by car or train or bus or airplane, whatever it is. I believe in you. So around this same time, once I was finally able to start spending time at monasteries, that alone was a huge boost in my practice, and I saw it immediately. And I knew realistically at that time, I was only going to be able to go once or twice a year. I could not afford the bus and the train repeatedly because I was a poor college student. And 12 hours was a really long trip. So I was like, what can I do online? And good viewer, you've already taken that step. I wish that when I was starting to get interested in Buddhism, that they had so many online opportunities. So take advantage of them. Even if you can't attend live, listening to the talks later. So the fact that you can listen here and so many other monasteries, you can get practically any flavor of Buddhism from almost any country online. After COVID, in particular, a lot of monasteries made these opportunities available. And once they saw how many people were actually interested in these opportunities, they maintained them in some sort of form after COVID. So you don't just have to tune into Empty Cloud. There are so many amazing bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, or bhikshus and bhikkhunis online these days. So take advantage of it. There's even a lot of chat groups for Buddhists, though be careful with these. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. For example, many of you are likely familiar with Bhante Jayasara. He was the first one to make a Discord group with the focus being the early Buddhist texts. Not too long after him, Yuttadhammo Bhikkhu ended up making one. Clear Mountain Monastery has one now. So there's these high quality monastics that are making these spaces where you can focus on your practice and the studies within a safe, high quality community. So you can reach out to these different monastics or go on their websites and find like-minded people. I remember when I first started looking at different forums in particular, I noticed very quickly there is no metta on them. So that turned me off quite a bit. So I was happy I found Bhante Jayasara, because at the time, 2016, 2017, he was the only place that I found was accessible to me and at a level that made sense. Another thing related to Bhante Jayasara in particular is he got me into the suttas, which brings us to the next thing that is useful. Sometimes people find the suttas to be intimidating or the language to be a little bit too hard, or before they even do anything at all, they just tell themselves, I can't read this. I am incapable of understanding this. Don't put yourself down. There are suttas for everybody. In particular, something that will come up is the suttas aren't relevant to me. I'm a lay practitioner and most of them are for monastics. So yesterday, I spent quite a while collecting suttas I was aware of that the Buddha taught specifically to lay people and that I felt were beneficial for practice of somebody in lay life. If you're tuning in from Facebook, the links won't be there because Facebook has a limited number of links that it allows. But if you're checking in from YouTube, or if you can check it in later and look in the description, there is a large list of suttas of various lengths that the Buddha taught to lay people. So all of those are relevant to your situation in one degree or another. And most of them also have talks in the past by monastics here at Empty Cloud. So if there's something that's confusing about them, those talks may be beneficial for you to check out as well. A related thing to this as well is sometimes I'll be asked what made me change from Japanese Zen to Theravada, and specifically more of an EBT flavor. And it's the suttas. I noticed a huge increase in my understanding of the Mahayana texts and in my practice once I started to read the suttas. At the time, I would do it basically once a week. I would tune into the Sutta Monday that was going on Bhante Jayasara's server, and it was really helpful because not only was I reading it, but I was also able to hear it. So if you're somebody that also just doesn't like to read or prefers to listen or prefers to see and listen, I've also been working on a project on my channel for a while now where I will read the suttas out loud. I have most of the Majjhima Nikaya done at this point. I think I'm up to the 90s. And I have a good portion of the Samyutta Nikaya done. And I'm hoping to get the rest of it done at some point. But it's a big, long project. And it's because I've also noticed that the more I hear the suttas, may it be through me doing these readings for YouTube or situations like this where I pick a sutta and I read it out loud to you all and I make commentary as I go through it. Or during Samyutta or Sutta Monday, where I would hear other people speak and I would read it at the same time, that helped with my retention. And the more that I retained the suttas, the easier it was for me to apply them in action. In particular, I remember one time I was at work and I got really upset with one of my coworkers, and it was about something I had no control over and was relatively trivial. And I had enough anxiety and social pressure that I decided not to say anything. And knowing that if I did act out of my aversion, that would cause issues for me and for them. And most importantly, the thing that made me pause was I remembered a line from the Faith and Mind poem, which isn't a sutta, but nonetheless, it was a teaching that I was focusing on quite a bit at that time. So because I had been reviewing it over and over again, when the opportunity arose for me to actually use the teaching in action, I remembered it. And I've had this same sort of pattern happen with the EBT texts since I mostly review those these days. Likewise, if people come to me with questions about working with aversion or greed or delusion, whatever it may be, I can point to the suttas. Sometimes I don't always know the number, but I'll either know the number, the name, or where to find it. And if I don't know that, if I have their contact information, I know the suttas well enough that I can almost always find it within 5 minutes. This is great because not only does that benefit yourself and the people around you, but if you hear somebody speaking, especially a monk, just because a monk is giving a Dhamma talk does not necessarily mean that they know what they're talking about. You can check them, especially if they say they're quoting the Buddha from the suttas. If you know where to find what they're referring to, you can then go read it and make sure. And if you're unsure, or if you think they're wrong, or you have questions about it, you can then bring that sutta to them and discuss about it, which is great for both of you. If they were right and you have a misunderstanding in the reading, you then have clarity, and because there's so much repetition in the suttas, you can very well use that in other places. If they're wrong, that's also great, because then they found out, oh, I shouldn't say that in the future. That was a fake Buddha quote or whatever. And you do see this in the suttas as well. Chitta, in particular, is a well-known layperson who would teach the monks. So it is something that you do see happen. And there's many born Buddhists that I meet who know more than I do because they've been immersed in the Dhamma since they were born. So until you're an arahant, you can take all these different opportunities to learn. And there is nothing you can lose here by continuing to study the suttas and deepen your knowledge. So the next thing that I think is useful is determining if you're somebody who tends to overcommit or if you're somebody that tends to undercommit to what you want to do. I was someone who tended to overcommit. So when Ango, which is the Japanese version of Vasa, they would do it twice a year, in the spring and the fall. When that would roll around, I would make all these commitments and I would only be able to keep a couple of them. And after 2 or 3 Angos, I would get a little bit frustrated and say, why is this happening? And I realized that between my lay commitments and my Dhamma practice, I was overcommitting. So be realistic with yourself about what you can actually do and be willing to change it. Conditions change. If you're somebody that tends to undercommit, something that can be helpful is to find a buddy to help with your commitment. They don't necessarily have to be in person, they can be somebody online, especially if you're somewhere where there aren't very many other Dhamma practitioners. In doing this, it can help find those blind spots. Like for the overcommitment thing, for me in particular, I found that it was because I felt like I was not doing enough. And I wanted to live like a monastic. And at some point in lay life, I did get to that, as much as lay life makes that feasible. But at the time, I wasn't there. My practice wasn't strong enough, and I had too many other things going on. So be realistic. Find something you can actually stick to. It is better to sit for 10 minutes every single day than it is to sit for 2 hours every once in a while. The consistency makes such a big difference. Another thing too, which will come to no surprise, is I encourage following the precepts. Very often I hear people say that, oh, I'm following the precepts, but I'm not meditating. Or I'm following the precepts, but I'm not reading the suttas. Or I'm following the precepts, but I'm not doing X, Y, and Z. I don't remember where, but I can find it if you're interested, anybody in the comments. And I know it's not in the list of suttas that I put in the description. But the Buddha says somewhere in the suttas that following the precepts is difficult. So don't cut yourself short. Even following one is difficult, let alone all 5. So whether you're following 1 or 5, rejoice in that. Build up from there. In particular, the 5th one, abstaining from intoxicants that cause heedlessness, is one that for familial or social reasons or whatever, people tend to have the hardest time following, and they'll beat themselves up for it. The fact that you're following 4 is already great. I encourage you to follow the 5th as well, but you might not be ready yet. So rejoice in what you are doing rather than beating yourself up for what you aren't doing. And this applies for practice across the board. This doesn't have to just be about the precepts. The other thing too is if you don't have strong sila, and if you're not practicing sense restraint, which by following the precepts you're doing that to some degree, your meditation isn't going to get very far anyway. Your insight isn't going to get far anyway. Your understanding will remain relatively shallow. And you can see this in the various descriptions where the Buddha talks about deep, profound states such as jhana. Before he talks about jhana at all, he always mentions sense restraint, withdrawal from sensuality. He always mentions seclusion. He always mentions sila. These are the foundation to a deeper practice. So if you are practicing seclusion, if you are practicing sense restraint, and if you are practicing the precepts, when you do have opportunities to sit quietly, when you do have opportunities to go to the monastery, when you do have opportunities to do the practices you aren't doing, you have set a strong foundation where you will be much more successful. So rejoice that you are doing these things. Really. I don't know if it's just a Westerner thing, but people really do come to me all the time acting like following the precepts doesn't count or belittling it. So don't do that. The next thing coming to mind is if you have the opportunity to stay at a monastery, or you live nearby, or even actually if you don't live nearby these days because of mail, is dana. When you take the opportunity to give a meal to the monastics, or medicines, robes, making sure wherever they live is stable and doesn't fall down, anything that the monastery may need just for everyday running, like isopropyl alcohol or vinegar for cleaning. That's amazing that you took time out of your day to make sure that the monastics can continue to offer these sorts of spaces. Where we're located on the East Coast, there's not too many monasteries. There's a lot of cross-pollination between Bhavana in West Virginia, in Forest Dhamma in Virginia, us, Empty Cloud in New Jersey, Zen Mountain Monastery in New York, Plum Village in New York, and Temple Forest in New Hampshire. Those are pretty much the main large Western type audience monasteries that you have on the East Coast. When you compare that to the West Coast, it's basically nothing. And we're the only ones that are pretty close to New York City in the Theravada world. So allowing these spaces to exist so that people can take time out of their day or their week to go and practice the Dhamma is incredible for all these aforementioned reasons. If these spaces didn't exist, if these communities didn't exist, it's much harder to practice by yourself. So rejoice in the fact that you're helping support these places. And sometimes people will also belittle themselves with like, oh, I can only come and offer a box of crackers or $5 or whatever it is. Don't belittle yourself. There are so many places, and this also isn't in the list, so I'll have to find it. And this actually might be a Mahayana story that's coming to my mind, but the point is really beautiful, where there is this woman who wants to give an offering to the Sangha. The Buddha had come to the town that she was staying in, but her only possession, other than her clothes, was a cracked bowl. So when she had heard that the Sangha had come, she spent all day begging for oil or some sort of fat and a wick. So that night, after she had collected the oil and the wick, she offered her bowl, her only possession, to the Sangha as a candle. And in this story, the Buddha then mentions how the merit that this woman had from giving literally everything was much greater than somebody who's really, really rich giving something, because they have so little. So while the rich person giving lots is still extremely meritorious, they have much more bandwidth. When you have a little bandwidth, the merit is so much greater because it feels like so much of a loss. It takes a lot of risk when you can barely take care of yourself to want to take care of others. So there is no such thing as an act too small. Rejoice whenever you give, not just to the Sangha, but to anybody. And this is something that rejoicing in general for anything that I'm mentioning, a lot of Westerners have a hard time with as well, myself included. And because I tend to be more of an aversion type, I was averse to rejoicing the good deeds that I would do. I'd be like, that's what people are supposed to do. That's what friends are for. This is what a good Buddhist is supposed to do. I would belittle myself for it, or belittle the act at least, because there was a part of me that was uncomfortable with acknowledging my own good deeds. So start to bring them to light. This can bring so much refreshment to the practice, no matter what it looks like. Especially if the practice is feeling rather dry or monotone or like a chore. This can help breathe a new life into it. Like taking a drink of cool water on a hot summer day, or stepping into a bath that's not too hot or not too cold in the middle of winter. This joy can be so refreshing and a real kickstart to the other parts of the practice. So since this is a stream of consciousness, I'm going to see if there's anything else off the top of my head. And if not, then I'll see if there's any questions. Related to that, questions. That's actually a really good one. So I have a reputation for being somebody that doesn't ask very many questions, which is pretty true from the outside, but it's because of the way I work with them. So some people ask a lot of questions and other people don't, and neither one is wrong. If you have questions, ask them. Feel no shame about it. That way, if you have things that are unclear to you, they can become clearer to you, or there can be a dialogue back and forth where you see, I understand this much now, but I still don't understand this part. I love those types of people because sometimes I have a hard time phrasing my question. I'll know I'll have one, but it'll be a little bit murky or vague. And over time, by the time I figure out my question, I almost always will have solved it by myself, but not always. So if I wasn't able to solve it, that's then when I'll start to ask questions. And the reason this happens for me is I spend a lot of time listening. I've noticed, and I've been guilty of this in the past as well, people will hear talk and be like, wow, that was such a good talk. I don't remember anything. So try to retain what is being said. Very often, what I noticed when I started to read the suttas and once I started to listen to more talks is teachers and the Buddha repeat themselves over and over and over and over and over and over again. I remember in particular one time I was reading the Samyutta Nikaya, and it was literally the same sutta over and over and over with like one word difference. And I closed the book and I was like, I know what I need to do. And after I realized that, I started to spend more time listening to what the teachers were actually saying. And what they're saying might be a little bit different, but it's the same stuff over and over and over again. What are they saying? How can you retain it? It doesn't have to be word for word. Personally, my own memory tends to be more condensing the information into a way that makes it I can apply it. I'll remember the gist of it, or the point, or the instructions. Other people can remember word for word very well, so work with your memory. If you're somebody that remembers things more by writing them, then listen to the audio and write it down. That way you can come to it again in the future. And if you see patterns in your questions, and you've been asking a lot of them, is it that you don't understand, or is it that you're not retaining? And maybe it could be both at times. Because if you're asking the same questions over and over and you're not retaining, then you're going to be like a pot that has a hole on the bottom. No matter how much water goes into that pot, it is never going to fill up. You don't want to do that. So be honest with yourself when asking questions if you're that pot. Especially if you find that you're asking similar questions repeatedly. Because then you'll want to work on the retention rather than the asking at that point. And I can't nail this home enough, the retention part. Every monastery I've ever gone to has had a lot of people who will say that opening phrase, "Great talk, I don't remember anything." So sometimes people will take notes during talks, which can be useful if you use them to remember useful things. Because I know other people who take lots and lots of notes and then they stopped because they realized they weren't actually remembering anything from it. So be creative. Work with yourself. What allows you to actually memorize the Dhamma? However it may look in your brain. Doesn't have to be word for word. So let's see, what else? Confession partners. If you are somebody that is following the 5 precepts, I know that Clear Mountain Monastery on their Discord has this program where the Upasakas and Upasikas are able to find a confession partner. So on the full moon and the new moon weeks, they will get with this confession buddy to say any breaches of the precepts that they did. And the point of this isn't for unhealthy shame, but rather to bring what we're doing to light. And sometimes if we're saying these things out loud, because we're also hearing it, and by speaking it, that means we have to have some level of acceptance, we're more likely to remember it. And if we're communicating with somebody, they also might make it so that they see a pattern that you don't see, which is great because we all have blind spots. So I highly recommend this. It doesn't have to be through them. If you have an in-person community, this can also be a great way to start to make closer connections with the in-person community. Any online ones that you like, similarly as well. You can make more connections that way, or reach out to somebody that you already have a good connection with to help strengthen each other in the precepts. This can only cause a benefit if it ends up leading to you being able to see before you break them. Especially in the beginning, what ends up happening is we'll break it and we'll see after. We'll break it and we'll see after. We'll break it and we'll see after. And at some point, we'll start to see a pattern. As we start to pay attention to what happens in our mind and in our body before we break a precept or certain exterior or interior circumstances, there will come a point where we pause for a very short period of time and we don't do it. Or we'll see it and we decide to do it anyway. That is part of a normal progression to breaking them less and less, and that's also worth rejoicing. So I think at this point, I've said quite a bit, so I'll see if there are any questions. If anybody is interested in the sutta readings that I mentioned I do, in the description you'll see audio for Majjhima Nikaya 41. I have the audio for the Bhante Bodhi and the Bhante Sujato translation there. If anybody wants to just find the channel easily, since that might be asked. So let's see, hello to Uttara, to Gregory, to Difference is Spreadin', to AC Gracia, to Nagesh, to Bhumika. So for questions, this isn't a question, but it's a comment. That is so kind and smart to tailor the teachings to the laity. People lose the plot and provide teachings intended for monks. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So I do think there is a place for lay people to also know what is being taught to monks. That way, if they are practicing diligently enough, they become a stream enterer or higher, they'll have more context on what to do or where to find it. But at the same time, I think it is important to know your audience and speak to their needs. So that's why often I pick suttas that are related to lay life. So if there is any of them that haven't been covered in here, or that have been covered but you would like more clarity on, send the monastery an email and I will put it on my to-do list. And likewise for other suttas as well. We do take sutta requests if there is any that you ever find are unclear. Then differences spread in. Thank you for helping us celebrate our goodness. Being human is so hard. It is. So take the wins. Definitely rejoice in them. There's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of bad things. So us doing these good deeds, it really does make a difference. You never know what little small deed can completely change somebody's day. Manal asks, Aya, question for you regarding questions which arose for you. How did you validate what you were initially cognizing if access to a teacher was limited? When would one approach a teacher? So in the beginning, like when I was practicing by myself, I didn't have the opportunity to approach a teacher. So I would just use what few resources were online at the time, which there really weren't many. Sutta Central was in its infancy. DhammaTalks.org didn't exist, and access to insight was a nightmare. And I think on YouTube there was Yutudomo Bhikkhu, Wat Metta, and BSWA. So I really just didn't have opportunities. So most of the time, I would just keep rereading what I did or listen to what I did have access to see if that would lead to clarity. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. Now that there's so many more resources out there, I will take the opportunity when I find I'm not able to get the answers in the suttas or in talks. So for example, I've been investigating right view in particular recently, and I do have some questions around it, and I do have one that I'm actually intending on asking at some point, and it's one of those where people have different opinions on it. So how this process for right view worked for me is I felt a sense in my body, which I don't know how to describe, but I felt a sense in my body, I am unsure about right view in this way. I don't know how to cognize it yet. I don't know what my question is, but I know I have one. So I started to read suttas about right view more, see what I could find. Then after that, I was like, okay, I had a couple other types of questions come up from that, but I knew that wasn't the main question, and I felt like I could resolve those ones, and I did. So after the suttas, I then went and listened to different talks related to right view from teachers that I respected to see if they answered it. And one of them did, and that's what made the question solidify for me. And from there, I was like, okay, this is how that teacher understands it. How do other teachers I respect understand it? And then how can I practice it? Because having an intellectual understanding is all fine and dandy, but you need to also be able to apply it. So sometimes that'll also be a practice or the process. I will get an intellectual understanding, an intellectual question, and then I'll try to rephrase it into how can I practice this. Point if I've listened to talks about it from teachers that I trust, if I've referred to the suttas, if I've looked at the Pali, if I've sat on it, if I've tried different ways of practicing and I still don't know, then I will approach somebody in person about it. So I find that if I go through this process, I'm more likely to remember it than if I just go and ask, which that's usually pretty rare that I have it that early on. But if I do and I ask, I'm less likely to retain it because I don't have this foundation. I would compare it to when I used to do mathematics. If I could tell my teacher, I can go from here to here, but I don't understand this step. Because I understood everything up to there, that would help them help me because they wouldn't waste time in earlier steps. And it allowed more time for me to understand the later steps. And sometimes they would also ask me questions about the earlier steps to make sure that I understood them as well. And it wasn't a coincidence. So by doing all that work ahead of time, by the time you ask the question, you'll be more likely to retain it, and the teacher will be able to help you more because it's not this nebulous type of question. It's clear and concrete. This is where I don't understand. And some people, they might not have to go through this process. That's totally fine as well. I think it's amazing when people can just immediately know, yes, I don't understand this. Please clarify. And then Manal asks, I also struggle with forming the questions out loud, which are occurring in the mind. How can I improve on this specifically? And I think I touched on that for the previous question. And then Robert asks, speaking of different views, if two well-regarded and experienced monks have different ideas about it, do you assume at least one are maybe wrong? Or could two seemingly different views be correct? So Robert, you bring up a great point, and this is something that I try to snuff out. I have noticed quite frequently that sometimes a view that is being expressed might sound different, but they agree with each other. So they disagree on the phrasing, but they agree on the meaning. And this was also somewhere where the suttas helped me. Somewhere in the middle of the Majjhima Nikaya, there is a discourse about communal harmony that actually mentions these things. There will be these monks that are in a dispute, and the Buddha will go over these different aspects on where they agree and disagree. And one of the first things I will try to figure out is if they disagree on the phrasing, but agree on the meaning. And this is more common than you would think. And I don't have a straightforward way to explain how I do this. I have a background in English and in writing. So I think that's the primary thing that helps me see when this is happening, as well as just through practice, familiarity in terms of how different monastics explain different teachings and where they take it from. So it's a little bit of a combination of familiarity, sleuthing, and knowing how different words can be applied in different ways, so like synonyms, for example, or what the conclusion is. And this is also sometimes where questions can be very useful. When you say X, do you mean this? Or I understand what you said as this way. Is that how you understand it? And this is where that foundation I was talking about to Manal can be very beneficial as well. Once I've started to see these patterns in different teachings, that allows me to have the questions apply more readily because I've already set the foundational work. And if I'm unsure, for example, a topic that people feel very strongly about is if everything is karma or everything is not karma. So people will be in one of two camps. And in the EBT world, people on both camps will pick different suttas for their reasoning for this. On the everything is not karma camp, there's usually 4 suttas that will get brought up as reasoning for why they think everything isn't karma. For everything is karma, there is this different line of reasoning that I won't be able to go over in the next 9 minutes thoroughly, but basically it's looking at the canon as a whole and how the Buddha talks about karma, and through that lens deciding that everything is karma. When you don't know, the Buddha recommends that you don't agree or disagree and you put it to the side. And that's where I am with these two. I've investigated it quite a bit, and I know where I slightly lean more to based on that. But until I become a stream mentor or higher, I'm not going to have that knowledge and vision. So for now, I just set it aside. Other times you have to look at your experience. Other times it might mean that you put aside what they said and research further in the suttas, or find where you don't understand to question them further. And there may be times where you end up deciding that they're wrong. So it all depends. I've found myself in each of them. But often I end up setting something aside if it's further along the path than where I am. So that is the last question I see online. So I'm going to conclude at this point. May you all be happy, well, and peaceful. I rejoice in all of your practice. Please do check out the different suttas and the talks in the YouTube description and use them to benefit your lay practice. They're all for lay people that I picked out, and there are many more out there as well. But this was a good start. The first one, DN 31, is rather long, and if you don't want to read something long, you can read anything from the Samyutta or the Anguttara, which is much shorter. And you can also take the DN in small bites. I do highly recommend that one, since it is often called the Lay Vinaya. So, in the meantime, may you all be happy, well, peaceful. May you always have access to the Dhamma, affinity to practice the Dhamma, good conditions to practice the Dhamma. Always be reborn where the Dhamma is available, and may you all soon realize the free, full bliss. So, until next time.